You stopped being my wife to become a dead weight in my life." Those were the cruel words of my husband while I was bedridden due to cancer. My daughter, taking the opportunity, added with contempt, "I can't stand you anymore. I'm leaving too." Without the strength to respond, I watched in silence as they abandoned me. I felt completely helpless. But life has its ironies. They came back when they found out I had won $8 million. However, what was waiting for them at home was a surprise that left them completely shocked. "Hello, my name is Wana, and I want to share with you a very personal and painful story from my life. I hope that by telling it, you can find some comfort and maybe even help those who are facing similar challenges. I was always an active and healthy person. I liked to play sports and maintain a balanced diet, and I regularly attended medical appointments. My job as an engineer allowed me a stable and comfortable life for me and my family. I had a husband, Tomas, and a teenage daughter, Camila. I thought our life was on the right track, but everything changed when I received an unexpected and devastating diagnosis. I was diagnosed with advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was shocking, as I had always led an active and healthy life with a balanced diet and regular medical checkups. The oncologist explained that the cause of the cancer was uncertain. Despite the low chances of survival with rigorous treatment, I was determined to fight for my life. After receiving the diagnosis, I sat down with my husband Tomas and our teenage daughter Camila to give them the news. They were devastated but assured me they would support me. That night, I expressed my concerns to Tomas, who promised to stay by my side. Financially, we were stable thanks to my good insurance, considerable savings, and a fund left to me by my grandfather. Our house was paid for, and I had set aside money for Camila's college education. A week later, I started chemotherapy. It was extremely exhausting. I came home feeling drained and could barely perform basic tasks. My husband and daughter helped with meals and hand housework and took me to chemotherapy appointments. This continued for 2 grueling months, but I began to notice signs of impatience in Tomas and Camila. There was a growing reluctance every time I asked for help until my daughter stopped responding to simple requests like a glass of water. The situation reached its peak when I had a consultation and Tomas didn't come down from his room. I called to check on him and he tiredly suggested I call an Uber. Surprised, I did as he suggested. The Uber driver was kind and took me safely. When I returned home, the atmosphere was tense. After a few hours of rest, I gathered the courage to confront my husband and daughter about their behavior. I asked them if they felt I had become a burden. Tomas sighed and admitted they were overwhelmed. My daughter confessed that she did not expect me to depend on them so much. I decided it was time to find solutions. We suggested hiring a nurse to help a few times a week with daily tasks and take me to chemotherapy sessions, especially on days when I would be too weak to walk or even talk. Anticipating this proposal, I contacted the hospital for recommendations. They directed me to a nurse who was both sweet and firm. He made sure I never missed a chemotherapy appointment, got my medication on time, and created a comprehensive care plan, including healthy meals. Everything seemed to be improving, and the doctors were pleased with my progress. However, despite my efforts to ease the burden on my family, my husband and daughter were still not happy. My husband, in particular, began to feel that the nurse was taking his place. I suggested that if he was willing to take on all the responsibilities, we could do without the nurse. I explained to him that the only reason we had a nurse was because I had become too much for him to handle alone. He reluctantly agreed to this idea. However, he argued, "Anna, you need to do more for yourself instead of making your condition a problem for all of us." I felt a surge of frustration and sadness. Calmly, I replied, "Tomas, you don't understand. There are days when I can barely lift my head, much less get up. Chemotherapy leaves me exhausted in a way you can't imagine." He crossed his arms and looked at me impatiently. "There is always a solution, Anna. You can't just give up and expect everyone to do everything for you." Desperate for him to understand, I raised my voice. "I'm not giving up. I'm fighting with all my might, but I need help. I can't do it alone." Instead of giving in, he got even more irritated. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting," he said before turning his back on me and storming up the stairs, slamming the doors. Later that night, I received a call from my mother-in-law, who lived in another state. She expressed her displeasure that I had brought another man into her son's house. Technically, the house was in my name, as I had bought it before marriage. Politely, I explained to her that I needed help and that the nurse was only there to ease the burden on my family. Emphasizing that the nurse would be temporary, she eventually left me alone. About a week later, things seemed relatively normal. My treatment was progressing fine. However, on one fateful day, upon returning from a chemo session, I came across a moving truck parked in front of my house. My husband and daughter had packed up all their belongings and informed me that they were going to live at their mother's house. I felt deeply hurt and upset, but exhaustion prevented me from expressing my feelings properly. The moment my husband decided to leave, right after my chemo sessions, when he knew I would be completely exhausted and unable to communicate effectively, seemed cruel to me. Searching for some clarity, I turned to my daughter and asked her in a shaky voice, "Camila, is this what you want? You're old enough to make your own decisions." She looked at the floor, hesitating for a moment before answering. When she finally raised her head, her words hit me hard. "Mom, I prefer to live with Dad. I find it hard to live with you too." I felt a lump form in my throat, trying to process what she had said. "Difficult, Camila? I thought we were okay, that we were facing this together." She shook her head, her eyes full of tears. "I know, Mom, but it's hard. I can't deal with all of this, with your illness, with home care." It was a painful moment to watch them go. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched my daughter, my little girl, walk away. "I love you, Camila," I managed to whisper, but she was already leaving without looking back. It was exactly what I feared when I started my journey with chemotherapy, feeling unwanted and abandoned. In the middle of this emotional turmoil, my brother stepped in with a solution. He noticed the nurse spending time with me that day and asked if I had any close relatives who could support me. My brother lived 3 hours away and had 2 small children, but he generously offered to take some time off work and stay with me until we found a more permanent solution. When he arrived, he was furious at my husband's attitude, referring to him as selfish and ungrateful. He pointed out that my husband had never had to work from home in our marriage and that I would always make sure nothing fell apart. My brother's leave from work was limited to a week, but he had another suggestion in mind. He told me that my sister-in-law's sister, Wana, was going through a difficult divorce and needed a safe place to stay temporarily. Her soon-to-be ex-husband was the primary provider, leaving her with limited financial resources. Wana was also studying radiology at a nearby university on a scholarship. My house was conveniently closer to the campus, making it an ideal solution. I would have someone at home in case of emergencies, and she would have a haven. I agreed to the arrangement, assuring my brother that Wana would not need to pay rent as she would be helping me. She could choose any room she wanted, as my husband and daughter had taken almost everything, leaving only the bed and some furniture. My brother stayed the rest of the week, and Wana arrived on the last day of his stay. He helped her with the move, and she expressed her gratitude for letting her stay. Wana promised to keep everything clean and help when needed. She was a genuinely good person. I explained that she wouldn't have to do much since my nurse would now come every day instead of just 4 days a week. I said goodbye to my brother and helped Wana settle in as best I could. The next week, things went relatively well. I missed my husband and daughter, but it seemed like I was the only one who did. They didn't even bother to call or find out how I was doing. Wana's presence proved to be a great help. She did the shopping, most of the cleaning, and even helped prepare meals. All this time, she never complained. About a month and a half after my husband left, I received the news that I was cancer-free. It was a significant occasion. I celebrated by ringing the bell at the hospital. My nurse asked me what I wanted to do next, now that I was essentially cured. My immediate decision was to file for divorce, freeing myself from a marriage that proved to be unsupportive during my challenge. With the ongoing divorce process, my focus shifted to the next crucial stage. Recovery was a slow journey, but I began to gain strength. My hair grew back, my scars began to heal, and I was gaining weight. I maintained my healthy eating regimen most of the time but allowed myself some days to enjoy my favorite foods that I had missed during my illness. It was 6 months since I was declared cancer-free, and I think I am finally ready to move on with my life. I called my old job, and they were willing to help me readmit to work remotely if I decided to come back. I think I will take the offer as I am planning to move. Although I have an annex in my house, there are too many painful memories here. I long for a new beginning in a smaller place. My husband doesn't know yet, but I am planning to gift the house to Wana. She came to help me when I was at my lowest, showing immense kindness despite being practically a stranger. Wana is free to sell it and use it as she pleases, as I don't want my husband or daughter to be able to claim it. My new home is in a quiet neighborhood in the countryside, and I am looking forward to this new beginning. It has been over a year since my first diagnosis, and I am well established in my new place and neighborhood. There are many friendly people around here, and I have made friends with my neighbors, including Vicente, who lives across the street. He is a widower living alone, with his children spread across the country who visit him only at Christmas and his birthday. Vicente invited me onto his porch for drinks and conversation and shared the touching story of losing his wife to cancer. He stressed the importance of life insurance for the financial security of his family. During our conversation, I opened up about what happened with my husband and daughter. Surprisingly, I had not heard a word from them yet, but I began to accept it. I have been devoting my time to finding new hobbies, particularly carpentry, and I'm starting to put together a collection of tools. One day, when I came back from the hardware store, Vicente informed me that he had noticed some people near my house. Luckily, they didn't do anything harmful, but they did come up to the door, knocked a few times, and eventually waited in the car. Vicente thought about calling the police but decided not to, thinking they might be my family. I asked him to describe them, and his description matched my husband and daughter. I couldn't understand how they found my new address, as only my brother and his wife knew where I lived. This left me curious as to why they were looking for me after almost a year. Vicente assured me that if they came back, I shouldn't go out and that he would take care of the situation. Frankly, I had no desire to interact with them after they left me at my lowest point. Later that night, I called my brother, who informed me that my husband and daughter were harassing Wana and her roommate at my old house. Luckily, Wana had proof documented that the house was now in her name and explained that she had bought it from me. A smart move on her part. I felt sorry for Wana for having to go through that situation because of my family. I called her directly to apologize and hoped to resolve the situation the next time they showed up. As for my husband, I'm not sure if he's aware of the unilateral divorce. My lawyer sent a copy to his mother's house, but it's possible they confused it with spam. Anyway, I've reached a point where I don't care anymore. However, my husband and daughter showed up at my house again, but this time it was early in the morning. While I was away working, I heard knocks on the door and decided to check the security cameras. To my surprise, it was them, my ex-husband and my daughter. My ex-husband looked the same, but Camila had grown quite a bit, practically a young woman. Now I followed the plan that Vicente and I had discussed, staying inside the house but approaching the door to listen. Vicente, always the good neighbor, went to greet them. My ex-husband showed up and asked him if he knew a woman named Wana who lived there. Vicente seemed as baffled as I was. My ex-husband explained that his ex-wife had lived in that house before her recent untimely death after a long hospital stay. My jaw dropped at that revelation. As far as I knew, there was no record of my death anywhere, especially at the hospital where I was treated. My ex-husband went on to claim that they were the next of kin, implying that the house belonged to them by right. Vicente reported that someone named Wana had lived there for a while but clarified that she was divorced. He also mentioned that during our time as neighbors, I had told him that my husband had left me and that I had filed for a unilateral divorce. Vicente calmly added, from what Wana told me, he planned to donate all of his property to charity as he has no other family other than his brother. He paused, observing her reaction. That's why it seemed strange to me to see two people in his house. The conversation lapsed into an awkward silence before Vicente asked, "Do you have a death certificate or a will to prove what you were saying?" They responded in the negative, looking a little bewildered. Vicente explained patiently, "Well, if you get those documents, you can take them to the county office. If indeed you are the rightful owners, you will be able to get the deed in your name." My ex-husband did not like the suggestion and exploded. "Who do you think you are to butt into my affairs?" He began to yell. His anger was evident. "You don't have the authority to interfere here. Mind your own business." I felt a deep shame. The people in this neighborhood had been nothing but nice to me, and here was my ex-husband making a scene and disturbing the peace. Vicente, keeping his cool, simply replied, "I'm just trying to help keep order here. We are going to solve this the right way." But my ex-husband kept yelling, accusing Vicente of meddling. It was an embarrassing situation, and I was impressed by Vicente's patience and composure in the face of chaos. Part of me wanted to go out and teach him a lesson, but I chose to stick with our plan. Vicente, bless him, apologized to them and explained that he was just trying to help. He went back home, and shortly after, my ex-husband and daughter left. After finishing work, I went to Vicente's house to apologize. He ignored it, mentioning that although he found my husband's behavior repulsive, he also found the explosion somewhat funny. I would have liked to agree with him, but I knew my husband could be temperamental when he was upset. If he came back, I was determined to confront him and ask him to leave me alone. And he came back the next day. I was sitting in my home office when I heard a loud bang. Running into the living room, I found my front window smashed and people screaming outside. I thought there might be a maniac on the loose, and somehow I was right. It was my ex-husband. He had broken my window, and my neighbors were trying to restrain him. He had been causing a disturbance for a while, but I hadn't heard him because I was wearing noise-canceling headphones while working. When I got outside, 2 of my older neighbors were trying to deal with the situation. They were trying to stop my ex from causing any more damage. He and Camila were holding canes and had already broken some of my flower pots. I grabbed him by the arm and asked him if he had lost his mind. He was shocked to see me alive. I told him and my daughter to get off my property before I called the police. Without me knowing, my neighbors had already made the call. He seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't contacted them after he got better. He insisted that he and Camila would have come back. I replied that when we got married, we made vows to support each other in sickness and in health, and he broke those vows. I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. He was no longer my husband. I had sent out divorce papers months ago and asked them again to leave. Then he mentioned our daughter, saying that Camila was going to college next year and that I couldn't afford the tuition. I just replied that our daughter had also left me and that I was willing to give up all of my parental rights. I told him that he should have thought of that before he left me. I didn't want anything to do with either of them. Upon hearing this, he became enraged, calling me selfish and heartless. I found it ironic considering the circumstances. "You are the last person who should call someone selfish," I yelled back. He called me an idiot and said he would make sure I never owned a dime again, at which point he swung the baton at me. But the police immediately arrived and arrested him. My daughter was also arrested. They asked me if I wanted to press charges, and of course I agreed. My ex-husband and daughter started crying loudly as they put him in the patrol car, but I felt no sympathy for them. I had everything on video, including the scene of my ex-husband breaking the window, and I had already sent the evidence to the police. After work, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the broken glass. Someone would come the next day to repair it, but for the moment, a tarp covered the house to protect it from the elements. Vicente gave me some buckets to put my plants in until I could replace the pots. Curious about what brought my ex-husband back, I did some research. I discovered that his mother had passed away 2 months ago, and that the house where they were staying did not belong to him or his father but to a cousin. The cousin decided to kick them out because he wanted to sell the house. My ex-husband and our daughter sold most of his parents' belongings and were living in a motel for a while. When they returned to our old house and found no one there, they assumed I was dead and began searching for my belongings, which led them to find me. It was during that search they discovered something that left them in shock. I had property valued at $8 million. This discovery increased their greed and determination to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Now they face vandalism charges, attempted breaking, and attempted assault. Since Camila is a minor, she is receiving community service, but my ex-husband is facing time behind bars, as this was premeditated. Her situation is difficult. Living in a motel without a fixed residence has complicated things. Camila, being only 17, has to balance school with community service, which affects her academic performance and college prospects. Her behavior has begun to draw the attention of school authorities, who are now monitoring her progress closely. My ex-husband, on the other hand, is incarcerated awaiting trial. The lack of a stable environment and the stress of the situation have also affected him deeply. He lost his job due to his actions and now faces additional financial hardships, not to mention the stain on his criminal record, which will make it difficult for him to reintegrate into the job market in the future. I am considering getting a restraining order to make sure they can't get close to me again. At least for now, I won't have to worry about him for quite a while. There was a time when I thought maybe I was being too cruel, especially to my daughter. The weight of guilt washed over me, and I wondered if I was making the right decision. However, the vivid memory of how I was left to face death alone made me reflect deeply. Every moment of loneliness and pain I endured on my own reinforced my conviction that my choice was indeed the right one. The peace and stability I found in my new home are something I am not willing to sacrifice again. Thank you for listening to the story this far. Now I would love to know what you think about this story. Leave your comment below, share your impressions and opinions, subscribe to the channel, and like the video to find out about upcoming stories.